Okay, so, and I was able to get the map going here. So, you know what? I just realized this is my last thing. I'm taking off my shoes.
Well, you know, Jesus sat down to teach.
Did he?
Do they hurt?
Well, my back is what hurts. So standing actually is preferred, but when you stand in boots, it's like pain on the feet. So this is better. This is much better. I will be a happier teacher now. Okay, so we are in Genesis chapter 42. And we've been talking about the story of Joseph and his brothers. And so those of you who haven't been in our class, I think you still can get some real valuable information from the lesson that's today. So Joseph is in Egypt at this time, just to give you the backstory. And he's a handsome, young, smart kid, right? He was 17 when he got to Egypt. And by the time we get to where we are in chapter 42 of the story, he's 37. So he's 20 years in Egypt. And he was at 17 years old. He was sold as a slave to Potiphar, and he became a trusted manager in Potiphar's household. And then he got fired because the wife came on to him, and when he rejected her advances, she got mad. And so she got him in trouble, and he got fired. And then he was put in the prison, and in the prison he rose to levels of leadership, and he interpreted a couple dreams. Those dreams got, the king had a dream and needed an interpreter, so they brought him in, and he interpreted the king's dream. Oh, look at there.
I brought the donuts in here, so.
Nice. Help yourself. That's good.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so the one thing that I kind of wanted to make sure, that's kind of the story that everybody knows, right? But the story that we talked about last week, and I want to emphasize again this week, was in chapter 37. Do you remember in chapter 37 what happened? Remember that Judah felt so bad about what had happened with Joseph that he left. And he went to that Arimathea, or wherever he went, where it said, he went to that place where he had a friend in Canaan, and he ended up getting married, having 3 sons. Remember, the oldest son was so wicked that God killed him. The second son spilled the seed on the ground because he didn't want to be an heir, be deprived of being the heir. I mean, it was a pretty bad setup. He spent, in chapter 37, Judah spends 20 years there. Remember, towards the end, Tamar, who was the wife of the first son, disguises herself as a harlot, and he goes into her and then has 2 sons through her. And so that was actually his oldest son's wife. So it was a mess. He had a mess going on there. He spent 20 years feeling guilty about Joseph, living in this land away from his father and the family. Now that was Judah. So you've got Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, all sons of Leah, the 4 oldest sons of Leah. Okay? So I just want you to remember that chapter 37 takes 20 years to happen, and this section that we've been on with Joseph takes 20 years to happen. So when that happened, when Judah was off and all that was going on, Joseph was all this. He was getting thrown in prison, rising to leadership, getting in trouble. You know, all this that was happening with Joseph was happening. And now the stories come together, because now we see Judah now back with his family trying to figure out this problem of the famine and going back to Joseph. So those 20 years that we have the story of what happened to Joseph, they occur at the same time as those 20 years that happened in chapter 37. You remember when we talked about chapter 37, we talked about how bad Judah felt and how guilty he felt, and that his life, he made some really bad choices, and he had just a terrible life. And at the same time, what's happened to Joseph? Everything Joseph is doing is turning out roses. Everything is coming out good. No matter what he does, whether he's thrown in prison, wherever he's at, it's turning out good for him. So it's the opposite story. Is the story about Joseph or about Judah or Jacob? Who is this story about? It's not about those guys. Who is this story really about? It is about God. It is about what God asks of these people, what they do, and how God responds to what they've done. This is about God. Now, before we got too deep into Joseph, we were thinking about, oh yeah, Joseph kept saying, God did this, God did that, right? When Judah's catastrophes took place, was Judah saying, oh, God bless me, this, that? No. Judah was not walking with God. He went away from his family, went away from God. He was just feeling guilty and bad about the whole thing. Now, Joseph, who's the one who kept talking about God, we're going to read more about his story, and we're going to see that the brothers come back. But when we get to the end of this story, I'm going to ask you, what was this story about? And it's not about Joseph or the brothers. It's about God. So start thinking now as we go through the story, where is God in this? And how is this about God? That's what I want to know when we get to the end, okay? Okay, so remember Joseph's the prime minister of Egypt. He gets married. He marries Asenath's daughter, the high priest of Heliopolis. He has 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Pharaoh treats him like family. He's very successful. It is a long time ago since that betrayal, not only because of the 20 years, it's been 20 years, but also because of his age. How old was he when he came into this? 17. Now he's 37. So are you different from the time you were 17 to the time you're 40? You might even be unrecognizable. You're so different, right? Now, if you were 60 to 80 or 40 to 60, maybe not as dramatic of a difference. But from 17 to 37, dramatic differences there. And that's what we're talking about here. It's been 20 years. Plus, he's lived a lot of life. A lot of water has gone under the bridge in those 20 years. So he's very different now. We're going to be in chapter 42. I'm just giving the background right now. So he's very successful. It's been a long, long ago since the betrayal that brought him to Egypt. And there's been no mention of his father, whoever came looking for him. Now, Joseph hasn't said anything. We haven't heard anything about him pining away. From his perspective, what happened? His brothers threw him in a pit, and he was traded away. He thought they were going to leave him there forever, ever to die. Or does he know? He doesn't know. He doesn't know if that was their plan, just to leave him there to die. Now we know that the brothers did come back looking for him. The older brothers did. And then we're surprised he wasn't there, and then the whole story came up. So they think he's dead too, and here's why. If he were sold into slavery, he's not in the cistern. So that the only thing they could assume is that someone snatched him up, right, or took him. And so if he did, if they were on that trade route, and if he got taken into slavery, you're not going to live 20 years. A slave isn't going to live 20 years. So they were even probably expecting that he was dead, because even if the best of circumstances had happened, he wouldn't have survived this long. It's been 20 years. Okay, so now the famines happened. Before we get to 42, the famine has started. Jacob and Pharaoh did a good job of storing up things. Remember last week I showed you, in fact, there's a picture of it right here. This right here. You know how we normally see the pyramids? This is a pyramid, but remember they had pyramids that were not shaped so pointed. Some were made of brick, some were made with stone. Remember they were made from skilled craftsmen, not like the story you see on TV where the slaves are making the brick and all that. They use skilled craftsmen to make these structures. They had capacity to store mounds and mounds and mounds of grain. In other words, this is not make-believe. This is a real thing. We can see the real places where they stored the grain, these huge chambers where they would store that grain for 7 years. Another thing they did is they built this area. I don't know how to say it right. I just see how it's spelled. I'm assuming it's Fayam, this right here. So they're up here from Hebron. They come down the Via Maris. they would pass these cities, Pelusium, Tanis, Heliopolis, Memphis, and then down here you would get to Pham. In Pham, the Egyptians, during that 7 years, when things were plentiful, they diverted river out of the Nile into this area to make another area to raise more grain. So here's your big naturally occurring area with plenty of water for growing grain. And then here's one they made themselves to be able to grow more grain. So in that 7 years, that's what Joseph did. He made sure they had storage. They started storing all the grain they could for 7 years. They created places to raise as much as they could. They were doing full crops, full on, head on, as much as they could in that 7 years. And that's the job he was doing. So he was very successful at it. Now the famine has started. So we don't know how far into the famine they are. 1, 2 years or so, they're into the famine. And during the famine time now, they're eating this grain. And it's not just the people that are eating it. The problem has to do with the animals too. The animals need the grain to be able to grow. So it's everything. It's not just the people. And now we are at Genesis chapter 42. Genesis 42. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt. Okay, so where's Jacob? Back up here in Hebron, right? Quite a ways. In fact, they say that a trip from here to there, if you were going just carefully with herds or kids, it'd be about a month. So it took a while to travel there. It wasn't just a short distance. They were from Hebron all the way to Pham. Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, and he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" Have you ever said that? What's going on there? What does that hint at?
Do something.
What are we going to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. I don't know what to do. There's no grain. Well, we need to
let's
get
sit here
some
and
grain.
starve.
What are we going to do?
Do you think they felt guilty because they knew who was in, or do you think they just thought, oh, he's dead anyway, but they were dreading going to Egypt?
I don't think they had any idea Joseph was anywhere near Egypt.
Okay.
I don't think they did, and I don't think they recognized him either.
No, they didn't.
Yeah. So I don't think they thought anything about him being in Egypt. That was like 20 years ago, and water under the bridge kind of a thing. I think now they're just living their life out in their fields, and they're starting to see that the grain is running out, and they're not doing anything about it. And the dad says, "Quit looking at each other and let's do something about this grain." Says, he continued, "I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." Stupid kids. Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brothers, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain for the famine in the land of Canaan also. So the land in Canaan where they were living also was under famine. So it wasn't like that. It was just a localized area. So verse 6, now Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Yeah, but what does it say to Joseph?
There was this dream a long time ago.
But does he recognize him yet? Yeah. It makes you wonder if Joseph's not standing there going, 10 brothers come and they're bowing down to me. You know, can you just see what's happening inside his head? As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. Now, they don't say this now, they'll say it later, but he's speaking Egyptian to them. He's speaking through a translator. So they don't know that he speaks Hebrew. He's not speaking to them in their language. We'll know that a little bit later. It tells us that because it's through a translator. But just so you know, he's speaking in a different language to them. And so they're responding, and then an interpreter is interpreting what's happening in between. But Joseph knows exactly what they're truly saying. You know how sometimes things get lost in translation? Okay, what verse am I at? Okay, I'll start 6. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold the grain to all the people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he said to them, "you have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more."
Yeah, well, what's the life expectancy of a slave? He was sold into slavery.
Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you, you are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in the prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. Did Joseph know that Benjamin was still alive? Not likely. Think about what happened with him. I would imagine he made a lot of assumptions about what they did with Benjamin. There were only the 2 of them that were the children of Rachel, and Rachel died when Benjamin was born. So when Joseph was taken, when he was left, Benjamin was like, 8 years old, 9 years old? So he doesn't even know he doesn't know if these guys are after Benjamin. He didn't know that he was even alive until they said so, until they said that the son was there. And now what's he worried about? What are they going to do to Benjamin? Right? Benjamin's just about the age that they got rid of him. Right? There's all kinds of family drama going on here. And no one knows for sure, but they're testing each other out and how it's going. We don't know that he was trying to protect him or if he was just wanted to connect with him again. We don't know that. But there's got to be all those kind of feelings going on for him. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God." Now, wait a minute. When he says that to them, what's he telling them? When he says, "I fear God," he's not talking about the powers of Egypt, the Egyptian gods. He's telling them, I fear God. I am a Jehovah follower. I am like you in religion. Now, what do you think they thought of that? So when I go to my Knoll family in-laws, most of them are Catholic. Okay, so if one time we were visiting, I was visiting with one of the cousins, and she mentioned that she went to a church, I think it was an Assembly of God church or some other church. And I said, "Oh, I'm also a Christian." So am I saying I'm not Catholic? No, but Catholic is its own thing, right? I was associating with her as a member of the Assembly of God. And my other family members are Christians, but they attend a Catholic church, right? Mm-hmm. So when he says, I fear God, he's associating himself with their same faith, their same religion. Verse 19, "If you are honest men," in other words, we have something in common. I fear the same God you fear. We worship God. So if you're honest men, then let one of your brothers stay here in prison. What had he told them before?
They can all stay.
You're all going to stay in prison. He puts them in for 3 days, right?
Yeah.
So now he's saying, look, I fear God too. So since we have this in common, do you see how he's doing it? Let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take grain back to your starving households. Who's Joseph thinking about?
His dad and his brother.
the people that these guys all left to come get food for. He's thinking about the family. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die. This they proceeded to do. So he's saying, bring Benjamin here. That way he can make sure Benjamin's alive and doing okay, right? And get to see him again. That's the one he cares about. And meanwhile, they get to bring food back. Verse 21, they said to one another, so between them, so where's Joseph? Listening, pretending to not speak Hebrew. So Joseph hears this conversation, but they think they only hear. And they say, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. Reuben replied. Now who's Reuben?
Oldest.
He's the oldest. What else do we know about Reuben?
Went into his father's concubine, or one of the wives.
Yes, he was the one who refused, objected to the killing of the brother. And he was also the one that went back to the cistern to get Joseph. But he also, not that concubine one. Oh yeah, he's the one who went into Bilhah, the concubine, Jacob's concubine. And remember when we read that little snippet, Jacob knew about it, but it appears that no one else knew that he knew that it had happened. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So Reuben is, a great character, isn't he? A wonderful first son? Not, right? Okay, but what's he doing here?
Showing leadership.
He's stepping up. Maybe in 20 years he's learned a few lessons. Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? Well, but you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. So Joseph hears that. He hears that they regretted what happened to him. Did he know that before? The last he saw them, they had put him down that cistern and left him to die. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then turned back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Now who's Simeon? The first one was Reuben, then Simeon and Levi, and then Judah is the fourth. So Simeon and Levi were the ones who went and killed all those people after their circumcision because of Dinah and Shechem.
Lovely son.
Well,
These are noble people, the sons of Jacob, the sons of the trickster, have grown up to be much like their father.
apparently that was a shrewd tactic, though.
So now look here. Now we have something noble. You see, Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? So Reuben's kind of standing up and saying, see, we shouldn't have done that. I tried to tell you. And this touches Joseph. Down in verse 25. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get the feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of his sack. My silver's been returned, he said to his brothers. Here it is in my sack. Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other, trembling, and said, what is this that God has done to us? So what do they think God is doing? They think God is punishing them because by putting that silver back, it's going to look like they stole it, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they came to their father Jacob in the land, now wait a minute. When they came to their father Jacob. So if I left someone's house and I noticed that I had accidentally taken something of value that I shouldn't have taken, what would I have done? Go back and take it back right away and say, we got a day's journey, and lo and behold. But no, they didn't do that. So just in case you thought they had really refined themselves.
Well, they're coming back anyway.
Well, someday, maybe. But they go on down the road. They go on back to the family. And how many sacks were open at this point?
No,
Just one. Just one.
one other. The word Joseph used for I believe God was Elohim, and the word they use, the brothers use, is Elohim. So
Good. Thank you for noticing. Verse 29. When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, the man, dun, 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 the man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, we are honest men, we're not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan. Then the man who is Lord over the land said to us, this is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me so I will know that you are not spies, but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land. As they were emptying the sacks, there in each man's sack was the pouch of silver. Okay, so notice that at first it was just in one sack. When they get home and open all of them, they find the silver returned in all the sacks. So does that make it better or worse? Worse. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened. Their father Jacob said to them, you have deprived me of my children. Jacob, Joseph is no more and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me. Oh, brother, can you listen to him whine? And all the different tricky deals he's done with all of his in all of his life, and now this tricky deal happens against him, and he's like falling apart, isn't he? Then Reuben said to his father, you may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back. Now, who's that? Reuben, who was the firstborn, right? But Jacob said, my son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow.
Okay.
So Reuben is stepping up,
Well,
but
Jacob's making it obvious or clear that he has favorites.
and how's that working for Jacob? Not so well.
You know, these
Doesn't
two
he?
are gone. I have nothing.
Doesn't he have
What
a
about
theory
these
that
nine?
he's created all this strife?
He's created it by the way that he's treated the sons of Rachel, the sons of Leah, all this, the way that he's done
He doesn't see
it.
it that way. He's not taking responsibility for what he's done.
Oh, and because he was the favored son. Remember back when his mom treated him as the favored one over Esau. Now he's choosing favorites in his family. Take this as a lesson for y'all. That doesn't work too good. Making favorites within your children does not work well. Even if you have favorites, don't tell them. Don't tell anybody. Keep it to
Tell
yourself.
them all that they are favored.
Yeah, whatever you want to do, but don't make favorites between them. This is the kind of trouble we run into, right? Chapter 43. Now, the famine was still severe in the land, so when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, go back and buy us a little more food. The famine is lingering, and they are their animals. Their animals. They have quite a crew. 70 or so of their family that they're trying to live off the land with. But Judah. Okay, now's Judah. Which one's Judah? The fourth one. The oldest was Reuben, then Simeon, Levi, and then Judah. Okay, now Judah's the one that in chapter 37 felt so guilty about what happened, moved out to that other land, had the son that was killed by God, the second son killed by God, went and had a hooker who turned out to be his widowed daughter-in-law. So anyway, that's Judah. Verse 3, but Judah said to him, the man warned us solemnly, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. Israel asked, why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother? They replied, the man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. Is your father still living? He asked us. Do you have another brother? We simply answered his questions. How were we to know he would say, "Bring your brother down here"? Then Judah said to Israel, his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could have gone and returned twice." So what's Judah doing here?
Bargaining.
He's bargaining. He's also sacrificing himself. He's putting himself on the line. He's laying down that he's willing to be responsible for this. How did he feel about Joseph? Is he going to let this happen again? That's the thing. He's trying to step up. So we see Reuben trying to step up. Verse 11, "Then their father Israel said to them, 'If it must be, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift.'" So these things were luxury items. A little balm, a little honey, some spices and myrrh, some pistachio nuts and almonds. "Take double the amount of silver with you." In other words, they have plenty of money. They don't have grain. They have plenty of money. They are well-to-do for being shepherds and herdsmen. "For you must return the silver that was put back into the mouths of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once, and may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." So the men took the gifts and doubled the amount of silver, and Benjamin also. They hurried down to Egypt and presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward at his house, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal, and prepare dinner. They are to eat with me at noon." Okay, so what do the brothers think of that? Something's wrong there. It's scary, right?
They're gonna slaughter me and eat me for lunch.
What is happening here? Yeah, what is going on here? We're going to the house? Is he going to do something to us there? What is this? Go ahead, Eve.
My study note says that it was 2 years into the famine that Jacob's family had used up the grain purchased by the brothers in Egypt. I mean, I guess we must have a different way of thinking from then to now, but it seems like to me if Joseph had told them to go bring your brother back so that you can have your brother in jail released and all will be well, they wouldn't, and they have the silver in their bags, they wouldn't wait 2 years to.
But Abraham told him not, Jacob told him not to go. Back in the back. Yeah, in the back he said they didn't until chapter 43 when it says, "Now the famine was still severe in the land." So the famine was continuing and Jacob didn't let them go. So they were waiting, and then finally he decided he was going to go to send them. They had to bring Benjamin. And that's what Jacob was unwilling to do, was to send Benjamin. So in the end, in that first part then, he decided to go ahead and send Benjamin. So
Can you imagine if you'd been that brother still languishing in jail for all those years?
yeah, I was just going to say, Simeon is still in jail.
Yeah.
So Benjamin, he probably loves Benjamin lots, huh? About as much as they loved Joseph, right? Because they were the favored ones. So Simeon, leave him there while we'll wait till we have to go back.
And do you think he got special treatment from Joseph? Hey, give him, a
We
little
don't-
bit more
it makes you
rations
wonder.
or-
It makes you wonder what his conditions were while he was there.
Yeah,
But we
it
don't
does.
know. The man did as Joseph told him and took them into Joseph's house. Now the men were frightened. When they were taken to his house, they thought, "We were brought here because of the silver that was put back in our sacks the first time. He wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our donkeys." So they went up to Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the entrance to the house. please, sir, they said, we came down here the first time to buy food, but at the place where they stopped for the night, we opened our sacks, and each of us found his silver, the exact weight, in the mouth of his sack. So we've brought it back with us. We have also brought additional silver with us to buy food. We don't know who put our silver in our sacks. It's all right, he said. Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given your treasure in your sacks. I received your silver. Then he brought Simeon out to them. So, what do they say now? Nothing. They're gobstopped. They're like, oh, what? They're just listening. It's incredible what just happened. The steward took the men into Joseph's house, gave them water to wash their feet, and provided fodder for their donkeys. They prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon because they had heard they were to eat there. When Joseph came home, they presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." And they bowed low to pay him honor. As he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. So he hasn't seen Benjamin since Benjamin was probably 8, 9 years old. And Rachel is dead. Remember, she died giving birth to Benjamin. So Joseph and Benjamin were the brothers of the favored wife so there were a lot of years that they were together when he was just a very young child. Verse 31, after he had washed his face, he came out and controlling himself said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to Egyptians. So the reason it's detestable is because they were stinky field guys. And the guys from Egypt, the people in charge, they were well shaven, groomed, they used perfumes and soaps, they bathed every day, right? And you bring these guys in from the field and they've got crusty stuff all over the place and, they've been living out doing their shepherding. And you bring them in and they stink and they're not shaved and they're dirty. So you separate them. So it was not so much like a put down. It was just that was the way it was. They just that wasn't kosher, so to speak. Go ahead.
Is Hebrews a general name for shepherds?
It can be used that way, but no. But the Hebrews were known for being the shepherds. So it could be used that way. But generally speaking, it's just because the Hebrew people were shepherding out in the desert people, a group of people. So that's why. Now,
I think of Basque people as being sheep herders. Kind of.
But they're not, Basques aren't all sheep herders, but that's what we think of it, right? So now, notice though, who ate by themselves? Who's eating by themselves? Okay, you got the Hebrews by themselves. You've got the Egyptians by themselves. And who else is by themselves?
Joseph himself.
Why is Joseph by himself? Because he's neither Hebrew nor Egyptian.
Isn't he the highest status of the group?
He's the highest ranking. He's just second to Pharaoh. And he's not a part of any of their groups. They would have known that he was Hebrew. They'd say, you get the hint of it because they say, your God. That they talk about his God. And he says to his brothers, I serve the same God. Right? Their connection is their faith. So they knew that he was Hebrew, but he was groomed as an Egyptian. Now, I don't know if the brothers knew that he was Hebrew, but the people in the castle, they would have known because they knew his history and what had happened with him. They knew it.
But he wasn't stinky and smelly, so I don't know why they wouldn't eat with him.
Right. So that kind of makes you think like it's more than just the stinky, smelly herdsman part is part of like the caste system, like, you know. But it doesn't say that they couldn't or whatever, it just says they didn't. This is the way we did it. This is the way they did it. So they were all
Then
separate.
because of his position, that he was so much higher up in authority than them.
Between the Egyptians, the other Egyptians that were there, potentially. But when you would have guests over, your Egyptian guests, you would normally eat with them. I mean, there would be no barrier. And it does say the reason that they didn't eat with they separated the Hebrews from the Egyptians is because it was a detestable thing to Egyptians to eat with Hebrews. So this is a tricky thing. What this says to me is that Joseph didn't fit anywhere. That's what it says to me. Because he was the leader, or because he was Hebrew, or because he looked like an Egyptian and married an Egyptian wife and had children. I don't know. But he didn't fit with any of those groups. He wasn't a part of any of it. Yes, well, that's verse 32. They served him by himself, the brothers by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves, because Egyptians cannot eat with Hebrews, for that is detestable to the Egyptians. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages, and they looked at each other in astonishment. Why would they be astonished?
Because how would he know that?
How would he know how old they are?
How would any of these guys know how old we are? How would the person who set the table know where to put our place? That was stunning. That really puzzled them right there. When portions were served to them from Joseph's table, so they took from Joseph's table the portions, Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else.
It wasn't subtle.
It was not subtle. So they feasted and drank freely with him. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. Fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And he did as Joseph said. As morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once, and when they catch up with them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done.'" Now, divination, they were all very mystical in Egypt especially. That's why they accepted Joseph as someone who could interpret dreams. And they thought the reason he was so good at that was because his God was so powerful. So, they attributed praying, divination, dream interpretation, that was all from the gods. And so they had a thing where you would swirl the cup and look in the cup and then interpret that. So that was your divination cup, as a special cup. And we don't have anything here that says that Joseph did that, but it was a special cup that was for that purpose. When he caught up with them, he repeated these words to them, but they said to him, "Why does my Lord say such things? Far be it from your servant to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servant is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves." Gosh. Why do they say stuff like that? "Very well then," he said, "let it be as you say. Whoever is found to have it will become my slave. The rest of you will be free from blame." Each of them quickly lowered his sack to the ground and opened it. Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this they tore their clothes. Then they all loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, "What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination? And don't you know I'm a dream catcher? I know people's dreams. I could find this out." "What can we say to my lord?" Judah replied. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup." So what's Judah trying to do? He said the one it's found in will be a slave, right? But Judah said, "Oh, we'll all be your slave," hoping the little one could be gone, right? But Joseph said, Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace. Then
Don't be no peace when you get home. They were told to bring him back.
That's the one they got to bring back, right? Then Judah went up to him and said, Please, my lord, let your servant speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. Now, who's speaking here?
Judah.
Judah. That's the fourth son. That's the one that felt so bad about the thing with Joseph that he went out of the city. That's where he ended up with Tamar and had 2 sons by Tamar. And last week we looked at Matthew 1 and or the week before, and what did we see about Tamar's sons? That's the line of Christ. Judah, Tamar's son, those were, I forget their names. One starts with a P. Anyway, they were in the line of Christ that we saw in Matthew. Okay, remember that. We're reading about Judah right here. Verse 19, My Lord asked his servants, Do you have a father or brother? And we answered, We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me so I can see him for myself. And we said to my Lord, The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die. But you told your servants, Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what my Lord had said. Then our father said, Go back and buy a little more food. But we said, We cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. Jacob. His wife bore him 2 sons. No, Leah bore him, 6? There were both the concubines, and then Rachel was the one wife bore him 2 sons. One of them went away from me, and I said, He has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in misery. So now, if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant, my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, If I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please, let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy. And let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father. What is Judah doing? He's willing to take the place. He's willing to put himself in place. Some say that is why his line was part of the line of Christ, that he had that self-sacrifice, the willingness to sacrifice self.
Kind of foreshadowing.
Redemption.
Kind of a foreshadowing.
Yeah. Okay, are you ready for the big question? What does this tell us about God?
No matter what the circumstances, his will is going to be done.
And I think also, when I think of Joseph, if I were in Joseph's shoes, then my natural inclination would be to be angry and bitter and mad and all those things that, what was done to you. But, when you're walking with God and you trust God, and he gives us the ability to love the unlovable and to forgive. And so it also shows our, what we can accomplish for God when we're walking with him, because he can allow us to forgive and love the not so lovable.
All the terrible things that happened to Joseph, all those terrible things. Later, Joseph is going to say this himself. He's going to say, if that had not happened, I would not have been in the place to save all these people from starvation.
You can begin to see God's hand at work instead of thinking about yourself. It becomes not about us, it becomes about God.
So what about Jacob and Reuben and Simeon? These people who had done terrible things.
They also got the opportunity to redeem themselves. They learned along the way, their conscience.
They learned and they grew. They learned to do things differently, right? Now they're trying really hard to be honest and trying to say, no, we're not, that's not what we're going to do. We can't leave them. We can't go without them. They're trying to be that way. Yeah. So to me, that says that God might do that with me. That maybe there's not a mistake that you make that isn't redeemable. And that sometimes when you do become selfless, then God provides a way for that situation to work out. If you're willing to give up yourself, your own desires and your wants, God will put in the desires what He wants. He will redeem us. We have Christ. So when we accept Christ, we recognize that redemption. So then once we have Christ, we're perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, how do we get past the things that are our big mistakes? Even big mistakes we make after we've become Christians. Even when we actually sin after we become Christians.
Go to God. Ask for forgiveness. 1 John 1:9.
That's it.
If we confess our sins, God is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we confess our sins.
So Reuben, Judah, they were beginning to come to terms with what they had done to Joseph. Joseph is just finding out what's gone on here. He's acted pretty nobly, but he was a jerk at the start of the story. He was a 17-year-old prancing around in his pretty robe, making enemies with his brothers, right?
Okay. And what kind of dynamics went on between Rachel and Leah? I mean, they're sisters, but obviously one of them is the preferred wife. And
Right. All of those things that happen that we see as being not right. They're not the right things. And yet all those people came to a way that they could redeem themselves, that they could do the right thing. And when they did the right thing, God made sure that what happened turned out to be the right thing. Not always immediately. Joseph did the right thing by running away from Potiphar's wife. And then he thought he had gotten punished because he got put in prison. But if he did get put in prison, he wouldn't have brushed shoulders with the baker and the cook. And if he hadn't brushed shoulders with them, then he wouldn't have gotten into the king's house and become the one who manages all that. Plus, what do you think Joseph was learning in Potiphar's house and in the prison? He was learning the government, the Egyptian government. He was with those government officials. That prison was where the king's people who offended the king went into that prison. So they were the officials and the people. He learned all kinds of stuff. He was well prepared for what came to happen. When he saw that dream of the famine that was going to happen, how did he know to say, well, King, we can just start storing up 1/5 of blah, blah, blah. But you think that just like, poof? No, he'd been thinking about this. He'd been thinking about how we could store up and save. These were things he had been contemplating and learned about and been able to do. He was being prepared for what God had for him to do. But it took 20 years. Some of us may take a little longer. 20 years is a long time. 5 years is a long time. We have a hard time waiting 5 minutes. So when God is doing his work in us, we need to wait and let him do his work.
And trust it.
We're learning, we're growing. And the weird stuff that happens that you go, why would this happen to me? I'm a godly person, right? Why would this happen to me? Well,
I mean, how many times did you not get a job or you thought you were going to get a house and you would tell my kids and it's like, there's a reason. Something better is going to come along. And you think, oh, thank you, God, for not having that happen, not giving me what I thought I wanted.
right. And look at Judah's mistake. we have this juxtaposition between Judah and the boy Joseph. I keep trying to say Joseph. We have Joseph and Reuben and Judah. Joseph and Judah. In chapter 37, what did Judah do with his guilt? He ran away. He ran away and got into more trouble. What did Joseph do with his trouble? He bloomed wherever he was planted. He continued doing the right thing. He stayed linked with God. He stayed in his faith, and he just learned. So he's no longer the cocky little 17-year-old that was so irritating to them. He no longer had the father who was making the way for him all the time. He had to be on his own. He was completely alone in the world, except for God, who was by his side. And he had hard lessons to learn. Judah had hard lessons to learn. It seems like both of them have come a long way. In fact, all of them, it seems like they all have come a long way from this experience, except for maybe Jacob.
But God gave that knowledge, gave him the brain power. So he gives us a lot more to some people than he does to others. We have very, very smart, intelligent people that will be like Joseph was. He used his brain, not just go his way. So God started way back when he was a young person to give him the knowledge.
So to me, there's like two ways to look at this. One way is, what is God doing in me, and not getting frustrated myself when bad things happen, because bad things happen sometimes. And to let God do his work, do what I'm supposed to do the right thing, even if bad things happen, because it's about God's work, not about any of these characters in this story. It's about the work God is doing through them. So that's the one side of it. And the other side is that sometimes I have an opportunity to step up, and I might not be able to see what God has in mind. Mm-hmm. And I may be doing the right thing, and a bad thing will happen. Mm-hmm. Because only God knows what the end result is, where he's taking me, who he wants me to be with, or whatever.
Let's make it the best of all circumstances. Whatever circumstance it is, he made the best he could do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He definitely learned about delayed gratification. And he didn't focus on the here and now, but he learned to look at the long game, which then was immensely beneficial to him when the famine came, because that's not something he could fix right away. And by giving that more of a long-term way of thinking of things.
Later on, he's gonna say, "Take my loans back."
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we see what we learned about God in this section. Mm-hmm. That's who we're talking about. We're going to learn more about God and what he does in the next section on Joseph. So we're learning about Joseph, but it's not really about Joseph. It's about what God is doing with these people who are so faulty and fallible. And he's doing the same thing for us. And he has the power to do that for us no matter how faulty we are. He's doing his work. So we need to get out of the way. And if he's doing a work in Debbie's life, I need to get out of his way too. I need to make sure I'm not making it harder for Debbie to become who God is working with her to be. And she does the same thing for me. We encourage one another, and we stay out of God's way. It's not, we don't have to fix everything. Sometimes the hard lessons are hard earned. So let's pray. Father, I pray that you would be with us and that we would learn from you, that we will grow from these stories and become better people, that we will learn the things that you have for us to say and to do here while we are ministering here. We thank you for giving us this purpose, for staying alongside of us as we learn and we go through things. Thank you for using us to do your will. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.
Amen.